West Coast in Southern California until I was about 14. We moved here to Culpeper actually around that time, so I spent my sophomore, junior, senior year going to Culpeper High. There is a verse I kind of wanted to start off with because it's gonna come back here later in the story, and that is Philippians 4:11 and 12. It says, "I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether I'm well-fed or whether I'm hungry, whether living in plenty or in want." And then most people know verse 13, which is, "I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength." You know, for years I had heard Philippians 4:13 over and over again. I even put it on my leg. But Michael and I were talking not too long ago about context and how important that can be. See, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. It's a great verse in itself, but it doesn't mean much until you go back and look at the previous verses. That I am content in any and all things, whether I'm hungry or well-fed. Right? So I believe that many of us who struggle with addictions and whatever they may be, they come in many forms, are simply trying to fill a void, a hole in our heart, something where somebody had hurt us at one point in time. And so you may go through that experimental stage, but I think most of us, it's something to fill that void. It's something to mask that pain. So to go back to basically, as a young adult, I had gotten involved in a church not too far from here, was a worship leader for a short period of time. I grew up in a church environment. I grew up with, blessed to have two loving parents who were always involved in everything that we did. I remember being 9 years old and going to a church in Southern California in Anaheim. Some of you may have heard of it, called Harvest, from Pastor Greg Laurie, who's a big name in as far as pastors go. I remember being 9 years old and feeling called by the Spirit to get up and go do an altar call. And so I grew up in a great environment, and I guess that's kind of where I ended up getting into doing worship music. I always enjoyed music, and I was always kind of drawn to doing worship because the people I saw in the church were playing it, and even to this day I'm still involved in worship. But I had met a young woman. We ended up getting married. She was on the worship team with me singing. Ultimately, we ended up getting divorced, and for those who have dealt with divorce, there's so many different roller coasters of emotions that you go through, from anger to being hurt to loneliness and isolation. And I knew that at that time when I was going through my divorce, I had a lot of people around me that were not good influences. And so I decided to get up and move to Georgia, where I had some family, and things looked better. Of course, was the first thing that happens when you go through a divorce is you gotta for guys, I think they tend to want to get back in the shade. You gotta try to look better now that you're single again. So I kind of poured my energy into running and going to the gym, and those things helped. They kind of allowed an outlet for my negative energy, if you will, but that did not fill that void. At this point, I was starting to feel resentment towards God because how could my marriage fall apart? How could I have to go through a divorce? It was something I never wanted. So you can't blame yourself. You got to blame somebody. And so for me, that was basically blaming God. So I didn't go to church for at least 5 or 6 years. I totally avoided the whole thing. And then the other thing that you tend to do once you go through a major breakup is you try to immediately jump back into another relationship because, well, now you're feeling hurt because the other person says you're no longer good enough. So now you need some reassurance, right? So you try to find that in the form of somebody else. And I think that a lot of us do that. So I jumped into another relationship. She was definitely not a Christian and was very different from my ex-wife as far as personalities goes, and it worked for a while, about 3 years or so. So at this point, I had not gone to church in 5 or 6 years, and this relationship starts to fall apart. And so I find myself in a position now where I don't really have a place to go. Because when I moved to Georgia, I was staying with family. Well, they had relocated into another house where there just wasn't no room to fall back on. And so I find myself in a situation where I don't really have a place to go. I kind of enjoyed my job, so I didn't really want to relocate. So I had a friend that I worked with whose spouse worked at a hotel. Of course, this was not a very nice hotel, so it was low-end motels, but nonetheless, she worked there and pretty much ran things, so she was giving me a place to stay. As somebody who's providing a place for you to stay and you don't have anywhere else to go, you have a tendency to, allow things that you normally wouldn't. And also, when you're dealing with things like depression and anxiety, you allow things to happen that you normally wouldn't. I mean, if you'd asked me 6 years ago if I would have ever done certain things, I would have laughed at you like, there's no way. But pain, especially emotional pain, will have a way of changing people and changing you to an extent that you can almost barely recognize yourself. And so you start to allow little things to slide. And for me, that was to kind of go a little bit further down a rabbit hole of different addictions, whether it be alcohol, drinking more, different drugs, smoking a lot more weed, doing a lot of stuff that I knew better than to do. And that ended up in a year-long kind of downward spiral that really put me mentally in a really, really bad place. I was waking up every day with anxiety and panic attacks where I didn't even want to get up and go to work. I didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't want to be around anybody, self-isolating pretty much. And, also being unwise with the money that I did make because, when you're kind of living that lifestyle, being financially responsible is not exactly something you think about. So there were days and weeks where if I got paid on Friday, by Monday I didn't have enough money to eat lunch or was hoping I'd even have enough gas to get to work the next day, So when that verse talks about being well-fed or hungry or, I completely understand because I've been on both sides. I've had, parts, would you go ahead and I've had moments in my life where I didn't have enough food the next day. I didn't have money for food, for lunch. I didn't have money for gas. I couldn't pay my car payment and all these different things. And then I've had opportunities in life where I've had plenty of food. You don't have to worry about certain things. So that verse kind of really hits home to me. But so at that point, I had found myself up to that point in that situation, living in a hotel and kind of just really upset with where my life had gone. One thing that I would say had really helped me was that having been through that foundation, the Word tells us that, when you raise your children up in the Word, that it's not going to go void. It's kind of paraphrasing it, but I think that, God will call you back, all right? And sometimes we can run, but look, God knows everything. He knows where you're going. He knows where you've been. He knows how to get to you. So I find myself living in a hotel and in a place that I don't want to be. And I recognize that the path I was heading on was not one I wanted to go down. At least not any further. I already let myself go further than I wanted to. So I started to reach out to some family that I knew were pretty solid in their walk with God and just asking for prayer requests. And then it got to a point where I said, okay, I need you to call me a couple times a day because I knew my mental state was not very stable. And so I had a relative call me in the morning, and while I was driving to work, would read either a daily devotional or pray over the phone. And I'd have them call in the evening time and read scripture and just have like an hour dedicated to doing that. And at the same time, I had my friend with me who was still doing these things. And we were still doing these things while listening to this family member talk over the phone. And it sounds kind of ridiculous, but even just listening, even in that darkness, just listening to those verses were slowly pulling me. I was still being really resentful because I was still kind of mad. You know how you get like kind of angry at somebody and it's like you want to give up being angry, but you're still mad. Mm-hmm. That's how I was with God at this point. So I had reached out and I asked for them to reach out to me on a daily basis just to have an accountability, right? Somebody that I knew was going to be calling, so I needed to make sure that my head was straight or whatever. Just give me an excuse to have some encouragement. And I remember being on the phone with one of my relatives. It was actually my mom, and she was talking to me one day. She said, I feel supposed to go to Africa with me. And at this point, I'm going, yeah, right. Okay, so I haven't stepped foot in a church in 5 years. I'm not going to Africa. This is it. Of course, like, you can't, I wasn't going to say that straight to her, but that's what I'm thinking in my head. I was like, there's no way. You're crazy. You're absolutely nuts. And she kept trying to push me to come back up here. I left this area for a reason. I didn't want to come back. I was being very stubborn. But like I said, when God has plans, sometimes you don't have a choice. So things continued to get worse down there, and I eventually gave in to the idea of coming back up this way. And the idea was to work with my youngest brother, who had started remodeling houses down in the Richmond area, and he was doing well for himself. So I was going to come up here, and I was going to work with him. Working with him was not always easy, and me and my brother enjoyed working with each other, but we had our problems, and that didn't really work out. Which led me back to the Barbersville area, Orange area, where I ended up, what's the right word, giving in and going back to church, which would be down in Ruckersville. And, the first couple months was one of those, fine, I'm going, but I really don't want to listen. I don't know if you guys have ever kind of had that, where you can talk and you can hear the message, but it doesn't sink in. Your heart's still hard, and you're not listening. But I knew I needed to go. At one point, I was introduced to the worship leader of our church and had a quick conversation with him, where I shortly after that had joined back to worship team setting. What was really cool was that within a short period of time, I watched God doing all these little things that individually can seem like coincidences, but when you sit back and you look at the timeline of events, you realize that it was the plan the whole time. From being able to find a rare guitar that had been a lifelong dream, to opening opportunities to join the worship team, to putting the right type of people around me. So I started to fill my extra time, with positive groups. So instead of trying to reach back out to old friends in the area, which I knew I should not do, I instead filled my time with things like a grief share group, a divorce care group, or a Sunday night Bible study group, worship team on Thursday night, worship practice. So filling my days with constant positive reinforcement. I believe there is an old saying that says, show me your closest 5 friends and I'll show you who you are. I think that is an insanely accurate statement, because at the end of the day, the people around you are going to influence how you think, how you act, and the choices that you make. And if you're constantly putting people around you that are encouraging you to do bad things, you're going to end up doing bad things. So, with that being said, there's also another quote that I absolutely love. And while I was down in Georgia and staying with my friend, for the year that I was doing this spiral, we used to kept throwing this old quote from Albert Einstein around, and it was, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We kept talking about change. We kept talking about wanting to do things different. We kept talking about how tired of the way we felt and all these things that we just wanted differently. But day to day, you wake up in the same routine. You wake up, you go to work, you come home, you do whatever your addictions are, and it's just a cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again. But I want something different. I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't want to live this lifestyle anymore, but yet you keep making the same choices over and over again. I decided that I didn't want to live that way anymore, and I got up and I left. I loved my friend as a friend because he was there in some of my most difficult times, but I haven't talked to him in probably close to a year, and I don't think that he's probably changed anything at all, because we can talk all day long, but when it comes down to putting one foot in front of the other and actually doing it, some people just aren't willing to move yet. And no matter what you say, no matter what you do, it has to be something that you eventually get to, where you just get so tired that you just have no other choice but to make that change. So I rejoined the worship team. At one point, I don't remember how long ago it was, but we were at worship practice, and I walked outside, and I asked Michael, if you had a minute, and I brought up this idea of an accountability partner. Somebody that if I was having a bad day or I was feeling a certain way or having certain temptations or whatever the case may be, I can pick up the phone and call and say, hey brother, I need you to pray for me. Hey, I need you to, you got a minute, can we talk? That sort of thing. I honestly believe it's not about how big your circle is, it's about the quality of the people in that circle. And so from that point on, Michael and I have had a great friendship where we call each other weekly, text each other daily sometimes. Sometimes it's just a scripture, sometimes it's a story about something that happened that day. The story Michael had said the first time he met me was that we were going to get along famously because we were both hardheads, I believe that's what he told me. That is very true. With my friendship with Michael, we both, I think, learned that having the right groups of people around you and being involved with other people that are like-minded, positive reinforcement makes a huge difference in how your day goes. And so the change is incredible because I was a 20-year smoker and I no longer smoke cigarettes. October, one day I went down to go watch a football game at Buffalo Wild Wings, and on the ride home I had a fresh pack of cigarettes. I kept them in my pocket for 3 weeks, didn't touch them, finally threw them out. I have not had a desire to smoke since then. It's been well over a year since I've touched anything else. So it's one of those things that I could slowly feel God pulling me back, little by little bit. And being the hardhead that I am, I resisted for a long time. When I finally chose to just relinquish control and just let God take hold, the improvement mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and opportunity-wise in my life, it wasn't even a slow change, it was just from 0 to 60. It's amazing how quickly, when you decide that you're going to let God handle things, how quickly things can change. I don't want anybody to come across the misconception that if you decide to give your life to Christ, that it's an easy road, because we all know if you pay close attention, it is definitely not. But I can tell you that when I wake up in the mornings, I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I don't have this overwhelming sense of anxiety. I don't have this dark cloud hanging over my head where I'm just like, I don't even want to be here anymore. Just the overall feeling of contentment. And that's one reason why I went back to that verse earlier. Is because I think that at the end of the day, when we learn to love ourselves, and I think that that's the healing that only God can do. When we learn to really, truly love yourselves or see yourself in the way that God sees you, and you can learn to be content, then you no longer need those vices in your life to fill those holes and to fill those voids. So again, just to go back and reread that again, just because I absolutely love that. I'm not saying that because I am in need, for I have learned to be content in whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. It's a powerful set of verses when we really think about contentment. It's amazing that when you think about places like Kenya, where you think, I think the other trip we were going to go on was Colombia. They're living with the bare minimums. And when you look at things like for instance, suicide rates, they are so low in the lower, I guess you call them third world countries or whatever. It's the first world countries that tend to have the higher suicide rates. And why is that? Because I think as we fill our lives with more garbage, that desire for more just continues to grow. And at some point you have to really get down to the core of how you feel about what's going on in your life, and are you really content? Are you really happy? And I think that for me, I was never happy with things that were going on until I finally decided to just let go and let God control things. And now when I wake up, it's not about, if I don't have enough gas to get to work tomorrow, at some point I know God will provide a way. If not, there's a reason that I'm not supposed to go to work tomorrow. And I think that that's kind of, we get so focused on the little things, and we get so caught up and anxious and worried about stuff, we forget to just sit back and look at the big picture. It's not that important. You know, whatever it is that's got you stressed out, it's not that important. God has a reason. We don't always understand, and that's okay. It's not our job to understand. So that's pretty much most of my story in a nutshell. I'm grateful to be around people that are encouraging and just people that will call and check up on you, people that tend to care. It's a big difference when you can put yourself with people that hold you accountable.